Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Moon River, whiter than a mile, I'm crossing you in style someday. Dream maker, you heart breaker, wherever you're going, I'm going your way. Silvery Moon, the Lacy Brooks Pack. By Bear Lair, 64. Adolescence has hit these two like a ton of bricks. The werewolf, Earl Brooks, mused as he watched his adopted grandchildren play, fight. They had mostly passed through their awkward phase and started to mature. Had he been fully human, he would each be at least a few inches taller than he had been. Earl, Wolf, was happy he was able to still think somewhat clearly. These days he acted more on instinct than thought. But in quiet moments like this, he could focus. Today, he kept the kids busy while Lacy and her husband, Oscar, had some private time. At least my knees and other joints seem to have come back online with the transformation. I'm still an old wolf, but not nearly as decrepit as I would have been as an old man. Okay, I wasn't that old. Hadn't even reached 60, but it was the mileage, not the years, that put the wear on my carriage, he chuckled inwardly. May help that I can take off some of the pressure by going on all fours. The longer arms still feel a little odd, but they seem to work well. Humph! He barked out, a command to the siblings when they started to get too rough. Earl, too, had bitten down too strongly on his sister Adele's arm. Foreleg, whichever. She was bleeding. That's enough. Let me see, Adele. The young female dogman, dog girl, dog teen, approached her grandpa and held out her injured limb for inspection. Earl Wolf could see that she held back tears. My brave young lady, so like her mother, he thought warmly. The gashes where her brother's fangs had scored her flesh were not deep. You'll be fine. Remember that we don't heal as quickly when we injure one another. Earl, too, you have to learn control. I know it's hard to balance practicing and wanting to train for the real thing. But thinking during physical training helps us to think when the time comes to face danger. That puts us ahead of those that fight with pure fear and rage. Earl, too, bobbed his head and patted his sister. He licked her wounds by way of apology, and she seemed to accept. Now, their grandpa proclaimed, time to go hunt some food. And with that, he gave a grin that, had he faced in his earlier life, would have made his bowels loosen. There it was, the ancient enemy, the wolf folk. Alpha M knew he'd smelled correctly. It ran behind two young members of his own species as they chased behind a wild pig straight towards the river, directly across from his perch. He was sure that the bear didn't realize the danger that loomed behind them. He smelled that wolf thing, and he and his pack had heard and seen it. He beckoned, and his mate and their own young adult pups approached stealthily until all four of their ferocious heads gazed from a rise along the bank. He rose, and the rest rose with him. No time to make a plan. They had to get across the flowing water and save the two youngsters from the monster. As they plunged into the water, Alpha M saw the two young ones plunge teeth and claws into the hide of the feral hog. It squealed in pain and fear. as blood gushed from its neck and sides. It made it as far as the water's edge before collapsing. The two adolescents completing the work they'd begun. The wolf thing had stopped. Perhaps he'd noted us. No, he was speaking to the young ones, directing them. Yet, as he and his pack pushed and swam towards the deep part of the riverbed, the large creature noted them and called for the two adolescent dog people. They raced to his side, flanking him, and took up defensive poses. They were together? Some demented, monstrous pack. Don't worry, Earl Wolf told the young ones. They are kind with you. They will not like me, but when I smell them, I too feel hostile. As long as they don't immediately attack, we'll try talking. If they do attack, run back away, then cross paths, make a running circle back to the den. Prepare to fight them and howl like crazy to draw your mom and dad. They may be near and will come to help. Oh, what about you, Grandpa? Sweet Adele asked, a little fear creeping into her voice, though not for herself. Earl Wolf's heart once again swelled with pride. I'm a large, ferocious being, Adele. I will draw them away and then try to join you at the den. There was no more planning. The strange pack had exited the river and now climbed up the low incline towards them. The four large dog people shook the water from their hair in turn. The spray sparkled in silver cascades of droplets that reflected the bright moonlight. They parted and walked past the corpse of the pork supper that the Lacy Brooks pack had taken. Earl Wolf issued a low warning growl from deep within his chest. Earl, too, attempted a similar sound. His chest heaved as he drew in heavy breaths in anticipation of a fight. Earl Wolf did not want one, so he first tried the warning. This is our territory, the land of Lacy Brooks' pack. These are her pups, and I am her father, the old wolf. You may share our food, but then you must go back across the river. Of course, he didn't use those words, but a combination of sounds, intonations, and gestures that conveyed the information. The big alpha for the other pack stopped and gestured for the rest of his family to do so. You are our enemy. You have no right to territory. How do you come to have two young ones of our kind? Earl Wolf decided to tell a short version of the truth. It was his nature, even more so now that he spoke from instinct. I do feel anger at your smell, but I belong in my pack. Lacy is the alpha. She was my child when we were both other beings. She was a puppy when one of the wolf folk bit her. I was a two-leg and took care of her. She changed. Later, we killed another wolf folk, but it bit me. She and her mate allowed me to live here, far from the two legs. The big alpha growled in disapproval. If she cared for you in return, she should have killed you when you were bitten. Your kind are our enemy. Had she been a true-born, she would have. Earl Wolf made the equivalent of a shrug. These are my grandchildren. They are true-born, yet they recalled their love for the old two-legs I was. During the exchange, the young male of the strange pack, who was near the same age as Adele and Earl too, had locked eyes with Earl too, and they were engaged in a contest of wills. The strange young adult kicked back some dirt in challenge. This was too much for adolescent Earl too. He roared and charged down the gentle slopes towards his adversary. They met and rolled down towards the water in a snarling, scrabbling heap of claws, fangs, and raised hackles, all followed by pine straw, dirt, and small rocks. Earl Wolf surged forward, but Alpha Male was closer and faster. He seized Earl too by the scruff and flung him into the flowing river. Earl Wolf's new nature took control, and he rammed Alpha M from behind to send him sprawling onto the muddy bank. Alpha M had a difficult time scrabbling to his feet in the slimy mud, but his mate was on Earl Wolf and gave him time. Earl Wolf backhanded her with his powerful shoulder behind the blow and followed it with a slash from his other set of claws. He lunged in and bit at her throat, but ended up with a mouthful of upper chest and lower neck. About the time the young female dove into Earl Wolf's legs and latched her jaws onto his right knee. Oh, the bad one. He yelped. Adele had torn into the strange young male to finish the fight her brother had begun. Earl, too, had found his feet and the shallows and waded towards the struggle. He saw that Alpha M was about to join the assault on Grandpa Earl, and that his sister was holding her own with his initial foe. He plunged forward towards Alpha M's back as the big dogman rushed Earl Wolf from behind. He understood that the alpha dogman would be able to reach around and tear out Grandpa's throat before the werewolf even had a chance. Everything appeared to slow in Earl II's perception. His feet struggled to gain purchase in the mud, and he knew that he would not reach the fight in time. Then a silver blonde streak flew into the affray and knocked Alpha M aside. A second, even larger streak joined in the tumble of fur and quickly turned the tide of the battle. Earl II rushed ashore and pried the female's fangs from his grandpa's knee. He pushed her onto her back and roared at her to submit, which she did. His sister had finished the fight he'd begun and had the young male on his back. Earl Wolf had released the pressure of his bite and allowed the adult female to cringe in defeat, her tail tucked as she issued a slight whine of pain. Lacy and Oscar had Alpha M pinned, and when he realized that his entire pack was defeated, he sprayed a little urine, tucked his tail, and relaxed. Lacy left Oscar to watch the other adult male and bounded over to check on her children. They were fine, though their ruffs still stood on end and each breathed heavily from effort, and increasingly in the realization that they had won the previous hopeless fight. She turned to Earl Wolf, who grinned at her through the pain in his knee. He had protected her young ones with his life, and once and for all removed any doubt about his new nature. After the situation was cleared up, Lacy, as the alpha of her pack, ordered the Alpha M pack to leave and go across the river. She offered them no food and made it clear that if they crossed into her pack's territory again, there would be no mercy. This was the law of the wild. Oscar loomed beside her and flexed and growled in support. So Alpha Male had little choice. As he reached the near bank, last to cross behind his pack, Lucy called to him, "If you see others of our kind, let them know about the wolf folk, who is of our pack. If you or any others harm him, we will eliminate their entire pack." Alpha M growled wordlessly, a way to save face, then turned and quietly entered the water. Lacy and the rest watched them disappear into the foliage on the other side of the river. Her entire pack remained vigilant for several minutes before any of them spoke. She glanced around at each member. Any bad injuries? Her children denied having anything more than some cuts, scrapes, and bruises. And Earl, too, had a nice set of gashes down his left flank. They were not deep, and he denied any pain as he huffed his chest in display. Earl Wolf indicated his knees. "I'll be on all fours, threes for a few days at least. She had a hard bite for a young one. She bit deep and twisted. It was well done," he added ruefully. Oscar patted him on the shoulder in gratitude, a gesture he'd learned from his former handler, Tom Knox. Earl Wolf grinned. So, did you have a fun vacation? Can we talk about it after midnight lunch? Alpha M checked his pack members. He was angry at Lacy Brooks' pack. He was the least injured of his own, and the two adults had taken him by surprise. One more moment and I would have ripped the throat from that wolf thing, he growled internally. He looked at his mate. Hard to believe that any pack would take in such a creature. I say if we meet any others of our kind, we should team with them to stop this monster. None of us are safe with that one hunting our land. His mate indicated her agreement, as did his son. He reached out and cuffed his son. You acted on your own before we were ready as a pack. Foolish to pick a fight when one was not needed. His son, Gruff, cringed in submission to his alpha. Apologies, father. I just felt angry. It was something in the air. A smell. The young male stared at me when I looked his way. I didn't mean to get anyone hurt. His mother answered before his father could. Learn from your mistakes, son. Anger can be useful, but too much may cause us to slip. As for the smell, we do not blame you. The wolf stink angers all our kind. They are our oldest enemy. Alpha M growled agreement. Let's hunt. We need to heal and consider what to do. I will not have a monster for a neighbor. Stop, Earl Wolf called out at the end of the early morning sparring match. Oscar, you won that time. Sorry, Lacy. Lacy grinned and huffed some of the breath that he now found so delightful to smell. I agree, father. He's getting better. She reached up and cuffed her husband playfully. Oscar simply grinned and huffed in return. The two youngsters had stayed back as neutral observers. Among their pack, they took turns practicing their skills, something they'd learned from Grandpa Earl Wolf and their father, who had been professionally trained in his previous life. Grandpa looked at the pair to ask what they had observed, when he caught Adele staring off into the distance. Adele, you want to join us, or have you seen a squirrel? Adele looked sharply at her grandfather. I see buzzards, 7 of them, back over the ridge to the north. The rest of the pack members observed for a moment before Oscar spoke. Maybe something large enough for us to take from them? If it's too rotten to eat, might be fun to have a roll in it before we let the birds get back to their meal. Everyone agreed, and, gaping with anticipation, dashed into the trees to find whatever carcass awaited. They stopped short of where the body lay. They practiced their planned standard approach, and once they had eyes on the target, only Earl, too, crept forward, a lone scout on point. The mangled carcass was large, unusually so. He scented no predators in the immediate area, only the feathered scavengers that now swarmed over their repulsive repast. The carcass smelled of recent death and held no sign of rot. He'd never observed such a creature. It smelled like a cow, yes, but with more of a wild odor than the creatures that the two legs kept as a ready supply of meat. His parents had forbidden him to take such creatures unless they wandered into the forest. This one had heavy, coarse hair over a hump at its shoulder, and short, black horns on a large head. It looked very tough, and he instantly wanted to hunt one. He took one last whiff as the wind suddenly shifted, and signaled for the rest of the pack to advance. Earl Wolf grunted. No word for this. When I was a 2-leg, we called him bison. That maw had grown to replace his human mouth, mangled the bee, but he had successfully created a new word in the shared instinctive language of werefolk. He continued, related to cattle, but different, fierce and wild. I never would have thought to see one this far from 2-leg territory. 2-legs breed 'em, but it's rare to see them in the forest, especially alone. Maybe it was driven to these parts by a predator. Lacy grinned and huffed. I saw these on TV when Valerie watched with me. She thought I would like nature programs. She was right. You were right, Father. I always saw them on the grass on plains." Oscar and the other children remained silent. None of them had experience with the strange creature. Lacy looked around at her pack. Go out from the carcass and look for signs of what may have killed the creature, of how it may have been brought here. It looks like only parts of it have been eaten. Internal organs, delicacies. Be wary, the killer may still be near, waiting to return to its kill. Each member of the pack attempted to find signs of large predators. There were some smells, and Earl Wolf detected the scent of something that smelled almost similar to the type of creature he had been once upon a time. Then, in the light of the fast-setting moon, he saw a track. The hunger gnawed at the recently altered being. It tore at his guts and his mind. He'd been very peaceable until recently. That pack of two-legged creatures had caught another creature they'd held in a cage in the place of pain that smelled of death. He'd gotten too close to the thing, and it had bitten him. It had hurt, and he'd been sick for a while. Then he fell into a deep sleep. When he'd awakened, he did not feel right. He'd grown, and he'd hungered for blood and for flesh. He'd enjoyed flesh before, but now it was all he craved. His face had enlarged, grown outward. His baboon-like mouth had grown into an elongated one, like those of the other flesh-eaters in these woods. This evening, he'd been near the pasture where the two legs raised the great shaggy beasts. The hunger had overwhelmed him. He leapt the fence and easily outpaced one of the larger, older creatures. It turned to face him as he approached on all fours, but he'd surprised it by standing on its hind legs and remaining there for his final approach. He kicked the enormous bovine under its shaggy chin and then leapt upon its back. He seized the short black horns and twisted until he had access to the face and neck. The shaggy monster roared at first, but its bellows of rage soon turned to the cries of agony, until all that was left was a mewling whine, then silence. In the distance he could smell the creatures that kept these large, wonderful prey animals inside of fence lines. He knew they were dangerous, especially with their loud sticks that shot fire and destruction. He would normally have had to drag such a large kill, but with his newfound growth, strength, and ferocity, he found that he could quickly gut the corpse and have the rest of the carcass upon his shoulders. He did so and ran towards the fence. He leapt it with ease, burden and all, and ran rapidly into the forest. He knew where to go, a nice clearing near a stream where he could drink his fill of cold water and then dine at his ease. By the time he'd neared the clearing, the sun was well up, and that made him feel tired. It had been a long night, and he'd run a good distance carrying a heavy load. He drank his fill of water and then lay in the shallows to relax for a moment. He awakened to the sound of growls and yips in the near distance. Near his kill. Big One, Earl Wolf, shared his opinion of the prints he'd found. Booger squatches down this way are usually small, no taller than I was, but bigger and stronger. Only the second time I've seen tracks, and the others were much smaller. Something odd about the smell, too. See if you notice. Each member of Lacy's pack sniffed the pug marks and rose. Oscar spoke first. Wolf stink, like Grandpa here. He flicked his chin towards Earl Wolf, mixed with the smell of the booger squatch. The rest of the pack agreed. Lacy called for them to be on alert. We've never run into anything like this. Didn't know booger squatches could be turned. Earl Wolf gave the equivalent of a shrug. Theory is they are related to two legs in some ways, maybe more so than we knew. Getting warm, maybe we should take some meat and go settle for the day. Lacy grinned and huffed, and the rest of her pack quickly joined her. The grins were wiped immediately from their features when a roar issued from just downhill, and an enormous form leapt from the brush and strode towards the party. It was bigger than any creature any of them had seen going upon two legs, a good 8 feet tall, heavy, with broad shoulders and a deep, wide chest. The head was large, sloped upward, and equipped with long fangs that overlapped the lips on a long, heavy snout. It dove on top of the bison's body and rolled forward. It rose again, the big prey animal now slung across its shoulder, and ran forward, then quickly turned and disappeared, headed deep into the trees. Lacy and her family each stared at one another and then her. They had all the time to take up defensive postures, but none of them had reacted to stop the overlarge predator. They were fortunate that it only wanted to recapture its repast. Lacy beckoned, and they strung out in the direction opposite of that which the creature had fled. When they found a good place to settle in for the day, near a nice cold stream, they paused to discuss what they'd observed. Lacy said that it was a creature with what Earl Wolf understood to be a gugway, a face-eater. He'd heard of them. He'd spent a great deal of his two-legged retirement studying cryptid creatures, in part to understand his little pup Lacy and what had happened to her and to the Alberts and poor Peter Barnum, to Oscar, and then to him. He'd enjoyed his studies. It was an intriguing way to while away the empty hours. In the early days, he hadn't taken the existence of such creatures seriously. He could only imagine how Earl Brooks would have reacted had he seen Earl Wolf peering through the window on a dark night. The Lacy Brooks pack had perhaps discovered the origins of yet another legendary creature. It started with two other legendary creatures, a skunk ape and a werewolf. The cryptid family trees were getting dense, he thought. He once again pondered of what would happen as more and more two-legs left the cities and moved out to the countryside. The wilderness areas would shrink, and cryptids and two-legs would increasingly find themselves in close proximity. He glanced at his sleeping grandchildren and spared a moment of concern for their future. Then he heard a frog croak down near the stream, and his thoughts, more tenuous in nature these days, turned towards pouncing and gobbling. The Alpha M pack ranged along the river and scouted for good crossings. They wanted to be ready when the time came to take on the Lacy Brooks pack and their pet monster. The Alpha M himself had wrestled with the problem. They couldn't risk having such a beast so close. Their children were nearly grown. They'd be off to find mates soon and form packs of their own, hopefully adjacent to his and his mate's territory, so they could still hunt together on occasion. He knew that this kind tended to have only one set of twins per couple for a lifetime, so their populations never grew overly large. Many mishaps could occur that killed off a young one before they had a chance to reach adulthood. He was angry that the slightly younger pups of Lacy Brooks' pack had defeated his two. They were not as large, but they fought the way more experienced dog people did. They reached a fork where a small stream entered the river from the other side. The river bent inward, so they should be able to cross and follow the stream for a while without getting into a fight. It was time to start looking for food anyway, before dawn lit the eastern sky and cast gray wan light between the boles of the big pines. The stream was a good place to hunt. Many animals would be taking a last drink before they turned towards their den, and sleep if that failed. He could slap some fish from the current. He got an odd, rank smell. It reminded him of Earl Wolf, but with overtones of skunk ape? How odd. He got another scent, again, close to familiar but not exact. It was tainted with the odor of freshly spilled blood and entrails. Shortly, he and his pack bound into a small clearing and discovered the remains of a large creature that had been almost entirely consumed. They found the scent trail of the odd-smelling monster that led away from the stream into the deep woods. There was enough meat to scavenge a quick snack. They partook and determined to hunt for a full meal. Alpha M was worried. He now had 2 monsters to face. The territory was becoming infested with the wolf folk. He was hungry again. The big beast had provided a satisfying meal, more even than he could eat. Still, one must feed. He still struggled to understand the changes that had occurred within his body. He'd always dined on a variety of food, but now he only craved meat, blood, bones, marrow, soft innards. He'd grown, his snout was now long, and his temper was short. He rarely encountered those of his own kind. They were scarce at any time, so there was no being he could ask. He decided that instead of setting up a trap, he would track and stalk his prey. He'd encountered the trail of a sounder of feral pigs. He enjoyed the taste of them. Their meat was filling, and they were plentiful. He could usually take one or more without facing serious opposition from the large boars. He eventually caught sounds as well as scents from up ahead. He ranged outward to remain downwind of the sounder. He would soon be able to see and thus select his victims. Then the group of porcines startled. Several squealed in alarm, and an entire mass turned to flee. Towards him. He took advantage and selected a medium-sized porker. As it noticed him and started to turn, he slammed his clawed hand into the side of one of its head and sunk his fangs into its neck, which he quickly broke. He rose, chest heaving in triumph, and the exhilaration of a fresh kill, only to see large figures bounding through the trees towards him. A hunting pack of dog people. This forest is infested with the things, he thought angrily. He scooped up his bounty, turned and fled into the heavy brush. He hoped that the pack would be too focused on acquiring supper to pay him any attention. But he soon heard hunting howls as they remained on all fours and plunged after him. He had to run while upright and carrying the freshly killed ham on the hoof. He made it to a muddy ravine over a seasonal creek and leapt forward into the darkness. On the other side was a tree with a crook about 18 feet off the ground. He completed a layup leap that would have made any NBA player envious, and lodged the meat in the tree. He dropped to all fours and ran as fast as he could. He outpaced his pursuers for a while, yet as he slowed to listen and sniff the air, he detected the telltale scents of one of the pack and heard sounds from behind. They were attempting to surround him and cut off any chance of turning. He grew angry when he realized that they would force him to fight. He was hungry, after all. Wasn't it enough that they had to disrupt his meal? Now they wanted to hound and harass him. How dare they? He looked for a place to make his stand, to make them pay for their temerity. So quoth this raven. My dears, I will have part 2 up on Tuesday, if plans go as they should. And, of course, Saturdays are for camping. I hope you all have a lovely, lovely Thursday. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.